Anna, you're so welcome to the Happier Work podcast. I'm delighted to have you as my guest today, especially because I saw you named as one of the, I think it was the top 50 influencer type things by Inspiring Workplaces recently. Spotted you
Yeah,
in that list and decided to connect with you because I knew that we had an upcoming podcast recording. Do you want to tell people a little bit about your background, who you are, and how you got to what you're doing today?
absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited about our conversation today. So my background's actually coaching. I've been a leadership development coach for 16, 17 years now. Prior to that, actually, I used to head up the L&D function at an AIM listed business in the city. Whilst I was there, I was assigned a coach. Sat in my coaching sessions and thought, hang on a minute, this is quite good. I would quite like to sit on the other side of the table here. So I did my coaching qualifications, did my NLP practitioner, and then set up my own business. So, and my business was really made up of two halves. Half of it was coaching people one-on-one, and the other half was going into organizations and training groups of people managers how to use coaching techniques to drive the performance of their teams. And I probably did that for about 5 years. I know now that actually that period was an absolute gem of a discovery period on where I am today, because I spent so much time in a training room, which actually is quite a confidential space actually in businesses, talking to managers about managing their people, getting the best out of their people, the types of conversations they need to have. And actually, whilst I was doing that, I recognized well, three main findings, actually. The first finding was that I would say 99% of managers have got really positive intent. They want to do a really good job. However, kind of lack the confidence, I guess, in how to do it effectively. The second thing I noticed is that over the 5 year period is that the reality of the types of conversations managers were having to have with their employees was broadening. So it was moving away from just having to talk about performance and deliverables and moving much more holistic. So the types of conversations they needed to have, which was fascinating to see. And then the third thing I noticed was, I think in coaching they call it the door handle moment, but I would go 70%, 70% of the managers that walked out of the room said, Anna, today was fantastic. Do you have a framework I can use on the job? And I think from that sort of L&D world, we're acutely aware that however good the theory is, the majority of that is lost very, very quickly if it's not put into practice. So what these managers are essentially asking for is something that would prop them up in the moment, give them the confidence to have a really good conversation with their direct report. So I thought, hang on a minute, I can see a big problem here. I can see that managers need support on the job, and I can see these conversations are broadening. So what can I do to help solve that problem? And that's where software came in. So I thought, well, if I can create a platform which a manager uses with their direct report that guides them through a conversation, I wonder if that would work. And that's where the concept of OpenBlend was born. So I'm now the CEO and founder of OpenBlend. We started out as a coaching tool where we enabled managers and employees to talk about well-being, so their happiness, confidence, ability to manage stress, and their motivational drivers. So the things that had to be fulfilled in order for them to perform to the best of their ability at work. And we went out to market with that. We got great feedback from customers very, very quickly. After a couple of years, our customers came to us and said, right, we're having fantastic conversations in OpenBlend around well-being and motivation, but we're then having to shut the system down to have a conversation about performance elsewhere. Is there any way you could put performance into OpenBlend and support us with the same frameworks that you have to have conversations around performance? So we did that, and actually very naively in 2017 became a performance management tool, which is a whole nother world to being a coaching tool. But it's great. We're today a performance management tool with a twist. Rather than just looking at performance, we enable conversations around well-being, motivational drivers, development, feedback, and performance and reviews as well. But our kind of real the thing that the aspect of it that I'm so passionate about is ensuring that people are having really valuable conversations that are structured in such a way that they leave with actions that are going to make their experience at work better.
Brilliant. So from everything you're saying, it sounds like it's really a tool to hold those conversations so that people at the end of the session, at the end of the discussion, they both walk away knowing what has been discussed and what needs to happen next, and having
Yes,
tools to be able to implement what has been discussed and the actions that they have to take. Would that be fair to say?
I think so. It's about structure. So we talk a lot about the conversation funnel. So where OpenBlend really comes into play is that it supports how a conversation should be. So it supports managers and employees to organize their one-to-ones. I know it sounds silly, but just even getting them in the diary, having them scheduled. We support recurring one-to-one bookings. We integrate with calendars. We integrate with comms tools like Teams and Slack, and so that it pops up in people's feeds, when they've got sessions coming up, and reminding them to prepare, which leads on to the second part, which is about supporting them to prepare for a one-to-one. So if you've been on the receiving end of a one-to-one where your manager's winging it, you can tell, right? So we really support both parties to prepare for those one-to-ones. And we support agendas. So every one-to-one starts with an agenda. You need to create that agenda. Then we help ensure that they're focusing on the right things. So there's a few different modules in OpenBlend. So you don't have to have well-being, you don't have to have motivation, you don't have to have performance. You can switch on whichever modules you'd like to. But then in the moment, we guide them. So we use the coaching frameworks in there. We use the GROW model. We use the Wheel of Anything. So the individual's data, if you like, is distributed through these coaching frameworks to support the conversation that enables them to create actions, and those actions are owned, they are time bound, and they're very clear. So when the action's due for completion, then you'll get pinged out on your preferred comms channel as well to remind you to get it. So we try as much as possible to interact with people.
Love that. And so I suppose for me, one of the things, if I think back, definitely been on the receiving end of a manager who is winging it, absolutely 100%. But equally, just for full disclosure, I'm sure I have been, I'm sure I definitely have been that manager who has been winging it. And if I think about the kind of conversations, whether it's a weekly one-to-one or a quarterly check-in that I used to run when I was in a corporate environment, like they were really lacking in any sort of structure. It was kind of, they weren't really developmental. They were just like, and here's what I've been doing for the last 3 months, or here, and here's some feedback on how you're performing and how you may consider improving. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the specifics, I suppose, around those performance conversations that we should be having beyond the immediate feedback, but like during those one-to-one sessions, whether it's a weekly catch-up, whether it's a quarterly or an end-of-year review. I'd love to get your thoughts around performance conversations.
Yeah, so conversations, I think, one size doesn't fit all. Everybody is different. Everybody needs to talk about different things at different times. So we really push an employee-led agenda. Now, the manager can add to that agenda, but we push through sort of nudges and notifications that the employee is putting what they want on the agenda. So, and then when you log into the system, you have your agenda there. So the way they create their agenda is from the modules that sit in the tool. So if they want to talk about well-being, they can click on well-being and it would sit as an agenda item. If they wanted to talk about a particular motivational driver that they have, so it might be effective team, or it might be sense of belonging at work, and if they wanted to talk about that, they could pop it onto the agenda, so it's already there. So if it might be about a specific performance deliverable, it might be about a piece of feedback. So the agenda is made up of sort of different content that sits in the platform to create a very unique but the structure isn't unique because the structure follows an agenda and you go through the framework, but that what the content is unique to every individual, which I think is really key, because you don't want it to be formulaic. You want to talk about different things at different times. So, at weekly, you'll have a more of a check-in. type conversation. Monthly, it might be a bit more of a deeper dive. Quarterly, it might be focus on developmental aspects. And then we have something called evaluate, which is a sort of a roundup, has a roundup vibe to it, to look back and what you're going to take forward into the next time frame. So I think each one-to-one should be a bit different, otherwise it gets a bit stale, doesn't it?
Definitely.
A bit boring.
Yeah. I love that idea that it's not formulaic. It follows a structure, but the content can actually change it up depending on the needs of the employee. And you're so right.
Absolutely.
Like, it should be led by the employee as opposed to the manager saying, here's everything. Obviously, they will have some input into what gets talked about as well, or what the discussion is. But I love this. And it kind of also puts the responsibility in the hands of the employee, because I know oftentimes employees look to managers to kind of determine what's going to be talked about, to determine the course of their career, essentially. So it's really great to see this. It's almost a shift in responsibility of, I need to manage this conversation and I need to make this conversation work for me.
Yeah, I think the need for employees leading this is enhancing as managers are becoming more and more squeezed. I think the manager role, as conversations are broadening, as employee expectations are, getting more and more, and with now the remote working, hybrid working, managers are all individual contributors pretty much as well. Exactly, and I think it's just becoming more and more intense. The manager role, typically they don't really have any support or any training or anything like that either. So I think there's more and more pressure for employees to be taking the lead on some of these conversations. As well.
It does. Then it does alleviate some of that thinking on the behalf of the manager then as well. Because like you say, I think there's more pressure. They're the squeezed middle where they are dealing with what's coming from senior leadership, but they're also dealing with what's coming from their own employees as well, in addition to having that individual contributor role, like you say. So they're actually managing that kind of their own day-to-day work, which, probably have a completely separate conversation about whether that's the right approach, whether managers should be managing people as well as doing the kind of the day-to-day stuff as well.
That's a whole nother conversation, isn't it? But I think it's worth remembering that every manager that an individual has, they are the employee to another manager. So all the conversations that you're having with your manager, they're having those as well with theirs, and the chain goes on. So
and sometimes we forget that. I think we forget that our managers are having maybe the same struggles that we are, but they're not necessarily verbalizing them to us in the interest of remaining professional or being strong or whatever that might be.
And I think the types of conversations that managers are having to have, they are becoming more personal. They are becoming more holistic, and and managers shouldn't be taking on anyone else's problems or anyone else's areas of concern or personal issues. There has to be that kind of boundary with a manager, and I think and that's really important. They can't be absorbing all of this information from, say, you've got 5 direct reports, taking all of that on. You can very easily become quite overwhelmed with all of that. So actually ensuring that the conversations are structured and on point, where you can show that you care, you can be having the right kind of conversations, but it's right, what's the next topic that we're going to be talking about? So you're keeping it within a professional capacity.
There's definitely so much more that's happening. Like, people are being a lot more open in the workplace, certainly in the 5 years since I've been working in corporate, talking about things like mental health, talking about things like periods at work, talking about menopause. That word wasn't even uttered, I'd say, when I was in corporate. What well-being looked like, I think we had a well-being month or maybe a well-being week, where if it was a month, then it was one thing a week over the course of 4 weeks. If it was a week, then it was maybe 4 days worth of 1 hour workshops each day or something like that. And I can see how much things have progressed and developed even in that short time, where people have massive programs to support well-being.
But I think I've got some interesting stats. I was talking recently around well-being strategy and the importance of manager conversations in wellbeing strategy. So there's a piece of research was done recently. 69% of managers are uncomfortable communicating with their employees, which is terrifying. And only 14% of employees feel comfortable talking to their manager about stresses that they're feeling. So you can see there's a problem here, right? When it comes to kind of well-being, is that managers don't feel comfortable talking, individuals don't feel comfortable talking to their managers, but yet 85% of managers say that well-being of their employees is their responsibility. They should be talking about it, which I think is a huge opportunity. You know, that they take it on, managers take it on as responsibility, but they just don't know how to navigate through that. So but yeah, I think as you say, it's they've kind of been thrust into this kind of new breadth of conversation that they need to be having, and they need support in order to do that.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we talked about before we started recording is this concept of belonging at work. That's something that I've been interested in for a long time, because I found myself in a few situations where I really didn't belong and I wasn't performing at my best. And I would have loved to have the opportunity to, I suppose, to, you know, it's so easy to look back with 2020 vision and be like, that's what was happening there, or that's what went wrong. But when you're in the moment, it's much more difficult. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this concept, the kind of general concept of belonging at work, what it means, how it's evolved, and maybe how to achieve more of that in the workplace.
So I've mentioned before that we have a module around motivation, and in this module, the employee is asked to choose between 4 and 6, depending on the settings, their key drivers. So the things that need to be fulfilled in order for them to perform at the best of their ability at work. And there are 31 that they can choose from. One of those is sense of belonging at work. So we have got some interesting data around what sense of belonging at work means to people. So the premise is that I've mentioned before, no two people are the same. So actually a sense of belonging at work could mean something very different to you as it does to myself. And, you know, and it's really important that the manager understands what that individual's definition of sense of belonging at work is. But what that means is that we get oversight into all the data, and I can look very easily at themes of what a sense of belonging at work means to people, which I actually really wanted to share today because I think it's interesting. So I thought I would just go in and have a look at the themes, and there's 3 key themes in here. So there's thousands and thousands and thousands of definitions, right? But the key themes are firstly at a macro level, I guess. So aligning with company culture, alignment with company culture. So looking at the organization as a whole. The second layer is more like mid-layer, is that belonging to a team, that sense of family, that belonging to the team. And then the third one is being able to be an individual. So it kind of plays out on 3 levels, which I think is really interesting. So if we look at those individually, so aligning the company culture, the kind of words that people are using in there is part of something bigger, a sense of pride for the company I work for, alignment with the company goals, so understanding the strategic vision, being part of that, understanding how they contribute to the bigger picture, which I thought was quite interesting, just that sort of quite very broad kind of sense. Then the team, the sense of belonging was about reliance, was about trust, was about sharing a common goal, was about communication. So and a lot of kind of the word family and that sort of belonging in a team came out of that. And then the individual, which I think we focus on a lot when it comes to kind of now inclusion and some of the fantastic work that's going on around ensuring that inclusion is front of mind. But that was very much about, which I was quite surprised with this one as well, is around success, contribution, feeling involved in what's being delivered, knowing that I'm really my role is really important, being perceived as hard to replace. So I think that's really like there's a need. There was a kind of the sense of belonging. I think there's a an essence of need in there as well, feeling like the jigsaw isn't complete without them in it, against delivery, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So
that
that the
this,
contribution that they make is really important.
yes,
I'm intrigued because on the individual side, I would have thought some sort of relation to authenticity would have been in there as well. So this individual being able to bring their whole selves to work.
yes, I
Yeah,
think yeah, that I mean there was, I mean, yes, I mean there was aspects of that as well. It was, but actually
just not
less than the
less. Yeah,
contribution.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
that they're heard and that they can be themselves. Absolutely, that was in there as well. But yeah, sort of high, sort of maybe a less common, um yeah, it was less common that was there. It was very much around contribution, which I
yeah,
thought was really interesting.
yeah, yeah,
um so, and I think what I sensed from that, because I think we know we can look at sense of belonging and the work that a company's doing, that happens in a team, but that happens on an individual level as well. But what I thought was really fascinating about this is that these are their definitions that are put in to a tool that's going to enable them to talk to their manager about it.
yeah,
So they've identified it as a driver, defined it in a way that's important to them, and then they're going to sit and talk to their manager about it. And it just goes to show, I think, the strength and the power of these conversations between a manager and employee is that, really, even if it's at a company level, the manager needs to talk to the employee about it. It's at a team level, the manager needs to talk to the employee about it. It's at an individual level, they need to talk to the manager about it. So it's
yeah,
at all levels, it all comes into this conversation,
yeah.
with the manager, which is fascinating. The managers are just this, they're right there at the coalface, aren't they?
Well, this is it. The manager, influences your direct experience of work for the most part. There's no other individual that you work with that would influence your experience of the workplace quite as much as your manager does, whether that's a positive experience or a negative experience, I would
Yeah,
say.
yeah,
And even if you have positive, because I've been in this situation before, I had fantastic relationships with my peers and then just have a terrible relationship with my manager for one reason or
yeah,
another, just, maybe a personality conflict or something like that. So it's so important. And I love how you've described these themes at that level. It's kind of that organization. So the organization, and interestingly, Anna, it ties in so much with the work that I do as well. So for me, at the organizational level, it's so important that people's values align with those of the organization. You've talked about it from a sense of goals. That's also a key driver of this sense of fit and belonging in the workplace. Is the organization trying to achieve something that you're trying to achieve as well, or that you feel that you're
yeah,
having this, you're contributing to something bigger than yourself, essentially. um this sense of having a team and family. And I know, like, some people kind of roll their eyes a little bit when you talk about being part of a family when you're at work, but for me, I
yeah,
have had that experience where I've really felt, a personal relationship with the people I worked with. And that was one of the best places that I ever worked. We were getting invitations around to people's houses in the evenings, as team building stuff. Like, it was just amazing, and I absolutely loved that. But being able to trust people, being able to feel like you can rely on them, because I've been in situations where I feel like someone has my back, and I've been in situations where I really can't rely on people, either that they don't have my back, that they're saying stuff about me behind my back, or that you're not sure whether the work will get done if you're not
yes,
actually there doing it yourself.
yeah,
um, and then this idea of being hard to replace, or trying to understand the impact that taps into a core need that we have for understanding the impact that we're having, either internally to our internal clients or having that impact on our external clients. So knowing that the work that we do is important, but if we weren't there to do it, and this is where feedback, I think, is really critical, if we're not there to carry out that work, then someone else couldn't do it to the same standard, or they wouldn't do it the same way. So our unique contribution is actually really
yeah,
important, and getting that type of feedback, specific feedback as to what you do differently, what strengths you bring to the role, I think is so, so crucial.
yeah. And it's just, as you're talking there, I'm just thinking, actually, um, being perceived as hard to replace. That really jumped out at me, that definition. And actually, is that deeper than being able to be my authentic self. It's kind of beyond that, isn't it? So if I can be myself, then I'm doing such a fantastic job in there that it's not very going to be very easy to replace me. It's almost a one step further along,
Yeah.
I think, which is
It's
interesting.
it's
Yeah,
almost from, you know, if we take beyond that, it's almost like authenticity is a given, that
yeah,
that in
yeah,
these organizations they have created that environment where it is okay to be myself and I'm showing up. And so therefore, if it's not a need that's being thwarted, if it's not a need that people are, you don't notice it because it's not there, essentially,
yeah,
as in the
yeah.
inauthenticity. So I think maybe that's playing a factor in it, and therefore this idea of the impact that you're having through the work that you're doing becomes super super important.
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I noticed when I was when you kind of look at these definitions is the use of the word feeling, and how this is a purely kinesthetic, and also when you try and understand a feeling, that again puts the emphasis on the importance of conversation, because you need, as a manager, if someone feels that this is what a sense of belonging means to them, then they need to understand what that is. How
Yes.
can you support them
Mm.
to achieve that and to feel that if
Yeah,
you're not asking the right questions and
this is it.
understanding what
Yeah,
that is?
yeah. It's giving people a language, because like this is something I often say, that if you asked me 5 years ago what are your needs at work, I would have no idea. But if you ask me what are your frustrations or what are the things that kind of annoy you, I
Yeah,
think people can open up quite
yeah,
easily about that. Like what are the areas that really that frustrate you, that are causing blockages for you at
yeah,
work, or blocks for you at work. People can probably talk about that kind of stuff all day, but
yeah,
it's turning that around and saying, okay, so what is the need here that's not being met, or what is it that we need to address here in order to make sure that you feel that you can do your job to the best of your ability, essentially.
yeah. And that, I mean, that's a coaching term called reframing. So you have people that find it very, very easy to talk about how they want it to be, and then you have other people that find it really easy to talk about how they don't want it to be.
Yeah.
So for a manager who is supporting an individual who is talking a lot about, well, actually, the individual might not even be talking about it. If they don't have that sense of belonging at work, they're disengaged, they're demotivated, they're potentially looking for another job, then that individual is, there's a third camp where these people aren't going to talk
Yeah.
about it. So you need to kind of maybe look, which is harder when we're working hybrid, but look for other cues and signs where maybe someone isn't feeling that sense of belonging, and therefore they are disengaging, they are demotivated, they are
Yeah.
starting to look for something else, and you have to go off almost body language and a lack of effort
Yeah.
in order to pick up the conversation from there. So yeah, it's about reframing it, supporting people to reframe
Yeah.
how to look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for calling that out. I think it's really important, because yeah, some people can easily say what they want, and other people, they know more what they don't want rather than what they
yeah,
do want. But then we'll also watch out for those people who are actually already disengaged and
yeah,
on their way out the door, and you know, maybe try and do something to turn that conversation around a little bit, or
yeah. I think,
turn the thinking around, even to engage in the
yeah.
conversation.
And I think that's another. I mean, obviously you can do this in other ways. You don't need to use software to do this. I mean, anything that prompts a conversation. In OpenBlend, you have we mentioned before, the manager or the employee have the ability to put something on the agenda. So if an individual has chosen a sense of belonging at work, or uh, uh, an effective team, or development plans, or recognition, or there's lots of different things they can choose. If a manager is kind of sensing that there's something a little bit awry with that, they can put that on the agenda. So there,
Mm.
straight away, you're saying, right, you've chosen a sense of belonging at work, this is your definition of it, this is where you currently are scoring, and this is where you need it to be. Let's have a
Mm.
conversation about that gap. So it makes it very, very easy for the manager to pick up that conversation,
Mm.
and put it on the table and give people permission to talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah,
I think simply having that type of tool creates that safe environment for people. You know, it gives them the language, it gives them the, it's almost like we're not talking about this directly, we're following, we're following a framework here to help us talk more easily, talk about what it is that maybe we'd find it hard to talk about if it was in any other situation.
Yeah, and I think also the other aspect that I think is really interesting here is that like we've talked about the three kind of main themes of what a sense of belonging means, and on an individual level, it's about doing important work and respected for the work, appreciated for the work, that they're contributing to success, that there's that kind of that trust there. So all of that is actually based around sort of clarity. So I think managers, I think managers should feel really empowered that they're in a position to create clarity and transparency about what an individual needs to deliver against. So, you can think as a manager, you can sit there and think, oh gosh, sense of belonging at work, what does that mean? How, it's all kind of feely and touchy, and I don't really know. It's not me, it's the company, and the policies we have and the values that we have as a company. How do I influence that? But actually, page one of a manager is making sure that the individual's got absolute clarity on what they need to do to contribute to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
That bit a manager should find easier to do.
I was going to say,
yeah. So I don't think they find it easy. I think they find it easier, to have that. So create that, make that really clear, really help an individual understand how what they do contributes into the bigger picture, because that based on the definitions that we've got in the tool, that's a massive contributor to a sense of belonging at work. And that's something completely in the power of the manager, because they'll know what their deliverables are, and it obviously needs to be broken down in the team.
And I would say for a manager, if they don't know what the expectation is on them, that they need to go and seek that out and seek clarification on what the expectation on them is, and then they need to, with their team. And sometimes it doesn't seem obvious, or you think by giving someone a job description or talking about their tasks or their duties, but you need to make that connection on an individual basis from what someone does on their very specific role, and how that contributes to the team, to the department, to the overall organization, to show that they matter. And then even above and beyond that, giving them feedback to say what do they do differently, or what unique strengths do they bring to that role that they're actually doing. I think tying all of that together,
is kind of page one, isn't it? We built we like listen to our customers all the time, and we'd always doing user interviews and talking to employees, and I'm very, very aware of how the workforce is shifting and how expectations are shifting, because that's my job, right? I need to make sure that the product is meeting that and is enabling today's workforce to thrive, not yesterday's. And a key finding that we found is in our objectives area is we had it just individual objectives. But everyone was saying, I just need to understand how I contribute to the bigger picture. I need to understand. So we created cascading alignment on an individual to a team to a company and goals. So every time you go into one of your goals, you can see what it feeds into. Now that that isn't unique at all. Majority of HR software where you're putting goals in there will have that. Whether or not managers or let's look at managers, whether or not managers place any value on that, I don't know. But I would love managers to know that actually is really important. It's really important for an individual to understand how they contribute to the bigger picture. Not just on sense of belonging, but on motivation and engagement and sense of satisfaction. And
I was going to ask you, Anna, about these other motivating factors. Now, we probably don't have enough time to go into all of them, but I'd love to know if there's a few that kind of stand out for you. So we have one of the motivational factors is this sense of belonging. Are there any, and I don't expect you to go through all 31 of them either. So maybe one or two others that sort of stand out for you as being more, I was going to say more important, and it's not that they're more important, but maybe the ones that you see being utilized more often than others.
I think probably I will answer that based on how popular they are.
Yes.
So with all
That's what
the
I was trying to say.
yeah, with all the kind of tens of thousands of users that we have, you know, what are they choosing are things that are most important to them. So, well, health and exercise has always been at the top. But it's a really funny one because it doesn't, the scoring on it never really fluctuates. But everyone's got it in as one of their drivers. So sometimes it's always there, and sometimes I kind of discount it because I think it's mostly a given. Most people have got health and exercise on there, which is great, and people are talking about it and all the rest of it. But it's after that, I think the second most popular or important is making a difference at work. And again, that kind of really feeds into everything we've just been talking about, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so if people feel they're making a difference. Clear career goals and direction is probably in the top 5. So people really understand what they're doing. Effective team tends to be very high. Interestingly, and this is really interesting actually, before COVID, money was in the top 5, and it had been. So we launched 2014. So from 2014 to beginning of lockdown, money was always in the top 5. And then over lockdown, it's gone right. I think it's at like number 8 or 9 now. It's incredible how people's perceptions have changed. That money is no longer like one of the most popular driving factors. That's gone down. It's been replaced by things like making a difference at work. Which is fascinating.
Is that because, and you know, I talk about this anecdotally, it's great to kind of hear some real anecdotal evidence around that as well. But is it because people have kind of started to rethink what work means in their lives, and starting to think about, well, it's not just about the money, it's actually about the impact that I'm going to have through the work that I do?
Yeah, at 100%. Yes, I completely. And I think it was a you know, whether or not it's going to change again now with the cost of living, and you know, I think the pendulum potentially is going to be moving back the other way. But can I see where it is today? But absolutely, people reevaluated what was important to them. Actually, that time with friends and family is another very, very popular driver that comes up. So, but it's worth repeating that all of these are redefined by the individual. So we give some tips on what they kind of mean, and then, but we do not let people progress through unless they redefine it for themselves, because it's such an important aspect of the conversation. You know, I couldn't sit down with you and talk. Say yours was making a difference at work. I couldn't sit down with you, have a conversation with you, unless I knew what that really meant to you. So it's a brilliant way for a manager to get to know and understand an employee as well.
Yeah, it is. Like, to me, it gives a language and a structure around a conversation that's happening anyway, if you like. You know, I was going to say most organizations, let's say most good organizations, or all good organizations, are having those types of regular catch-ups between managers and employees, whether those managers are managers of managers, whatever it might be. But yeah, really interesting. Anna, the question I ask everyone when they come on the podcast: what does being happier at work mean to you?
I love this question. So, and I've been thinking about it. I think, first of all, it means a lot to me because I've dedicated a huge chunk of my career to exactly this. So I'm very passionate about it. But the reality is that it is entirely subjective. And it changes frequently. I think happiness is a really interesting one. It's a very fluid state. You know, what made someone happy at work 2 years ago and what makes them happy at work now is probably completely different. So, you know, that level of fluidity, that change, those ebbs and flows are very, very present in that. And I think it's just really key to keep on top of it. So, for example, our capacity to manage workload will change. You it could change week to week, actually, and that could have a direct influence on that. Our external factors, such as a team dynamic, you might have a new person come in the team who turns out to be a complete troublemaker, and that's, they're all straight away, your happiness levels at work have changed and shifted. So and sometimes I think you get to a point where it's just time to make a change and move on from the job you're in as well, and I think that's okay too. So your happiness changes and all that. So I think where the need, sort of happiness at work, I think where there's a need, as a coach, I'm always coming up with a solution, but the solution and the need, I think, is a continual state of self-awareness. So where am I on that flow at the moment? Communication, a really good manager who understands you and your version of the world, an ear to help you adjust and nip things in the bud, I think is a really important, when we talk about a lot of the sort of well-being aspects and motivation aspects. Actually, none of what we intend to do, or the OpenBlend intends to do, is solve something at crisis stage. This is all about preventative. So it's all about prevention. So I think happiness is just this moving, fluid beast that I think is just really key, that you take responsibility for yourself, that you're self-aware of it, and that you've actually have got a good manager that you can talk to about the influences on it as well, because we can't control all of it.
Love it. Love this. And if people want to find out more about you, if they want to find out more about OpenBlend, what's the best way they can do that?
So we've got our own podcast, nowhere near as popular as yours, but we have our own series of podcasts. So we have newsletters that we'd love to get new people on, that we send out every month. And so if anyone has any interest at all in signing up onto any of those, or having a further look at OpenBlend, then if you can just email hello@openblend.com, and then that will come through, or my email is anna@openblend.com.
Brilliant.
So would love to hear from anybody.
Love it. Thank you so much for your time today, Anna. I so enjoyed our conversation, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation on LinkedIn Live after the podcast is released. So really looking forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Conversation.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.